Security will come to order. Today's hearing on the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency budget request for fiscal year 2023 will be conducted as a hybrid hearing. For any members joining virtually, speaking into the microphone will activate your camera and display your image on the main screen. Once you start speaking, there will be a slight delay before your image appears on the main screen, but do not stop your remarks if you do not see the screen switch immediately. If the screen does not change after several seconds, please make sure you are not muted. To minimize background noise and ensure the correct speaker is being displayed, we ask that members participating virtually remain on mute unless you have sought recognition. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. However, I or staff I designate may mute participants' microphones when they are not recognized to speak to eliminate inadvertent background noise. If I notice when you are recognized that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask the staff to send you a request to unmute. Please accept that request so you are no longer muted. Members can submit information in writing at any of our hearings using the email address provided in advance to your staff. We will follow the speaking order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, and then alternating by party, beginning with members in order of seniority present at the time the hearing is called to order. So let's begin. This afternoon, we welcome the Honorable Jen Esterly, Director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or Cisa. She is here to discuss Cisa's operations and its fiscal year 2023 budget request. Director Easterly, we look forward to a productive discussion this morning or this afternoon. The threats facing our nation's networks, including critical infrastructure, elections, emergency communications, schools, and public gatherings, continue to evolve in complexity, sophistication, and scale that pose novel challenges and test our capacity to keep pace with our adversaries. We are in a moment in our nation's history where our response must urgently rise to the occasion to address these growing risks. As the President stated in his executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity, incremental improvements will not give us the security we need. Instead, the federal government needs to make bold changes and significant investments in order to defend the vital institutions that underpin the American way of life. Since my time as chairwoman of this subcommittee, I have taken this responsibility to heart, seeking opportunities to strengthen Cisa's capabilities by bolstering funding for each of its mission areas to transform the country's capacity to defend against our adversaries. But I know there are no easy answers, and that funding alone will not close the gaps in our capabilities. The problems we face are not just the federal government's responsibility to resolve. We need to work collectively with our state, local, tribal, territorial, and private sector partners to study the threats, evaluate best practices, and develop and implement strategies to shore up our defenses. Director Easterly, I have seen you and your staff work tirelessly towards these objectives. We owe each of you a debt of gratitude, whether it's responding to the new crisis du jour or working proactively with communities to provide needed advice and guidance. Cisa has become a trusted agency, and I appreciate the discipline and dedication it has taken to get us there. But there remains much work to do. As technologies change, our reliance on new technologies evolve, and our adversaries seek to capitalize on any vulnerability they can find. We have witnessed that those who wish to do harm to the integrity of our elections have and will continue to deploy sophisticated mis-dis and malinformation campaigns. And we have seen the devastating need to prepare our communities for acts of domestic terrorism. We cannot afford to shy away from the complexity and urgency of these challenges. Yet we must be thoughtful and strategic in our response. Director Easterly, I look forward to hearing from you today on these issues and how Congress can help you better accomplish your mission. I now turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I really appreciate your having this very important hearing today. Good afternoon. Thank you, Director Easterly, for joining us today. I sincerely appreciate this. You're in a very important position with Cisa, and thank you for joining us at our subcommittee. Nefarious cyber actors and criminals are constantly attacking government and private sector critical infrastructure systems and networks, often for personal financial gain. Nation states like Russia, China, North Korea, and others seek to harm our economy, steal intellectual property and defense industrial secrets, and degrade our ability to fight and conflict. Cisa is charged with the protection of the .gov internet domain and to work with the federal civilian executive branch agencies to harden our cyber defenses and protect our critical infrastructure against such threats. As we have seen with the SolarWinds breach, perimeter security programs like Einstein, which was designed to detect external cyber attacks, have blind spots if the threat is already inside the network. Increased network visibility through continuous diagnostics and mitigation programs, such as endpoint detection and response, are key elements of our multi-layered cybersecurity defenses. But as important as these programs are, simple cyber hygiene measures are a critical line of defense and work to make it harder for persistent threat actors to penetrate our digital infrastructure. Changing passwords on a regular basis, patching and updating software to account for known cyber vulnerabilities, and multi-factor authentication are simple but effective means of preventing cyber attacks. In fact, recent network breaches could have been thwarted or at least significantly mitigated simply with the use of complex and unique passwords combined with two-factor authentication. In my view, Cisa has grown rapidly over the past few years and has been in the enviable position of having been provided significant resources by Congress. Over $1 billion in additional funding has been provided in just the past year. I look forward to better understanding Cisa's plan for using those funds to protect our nation's cyber and physical infrastructure in a smart and thoughtful way. Attracting, hiring, training, and retaining individuals who have the necessary cyber skills, skills that are in high demand across the public and private sectors, is necessary to defend against advanced and persistent threats to our network. Even with ample resources, the latest cutting-edge cyber tools and personnel, Cisa alone cannot mitigate every threat. Effective partnerships across the entire federal government, engagement with state and local entities, and robust communication with the private sector can reduce risk. Information sharing, especially of cyber threat indicators and vulnerabilities, is no longer optional because of how interconnected our digital world has become. Joint private and public planning and collaboration that happens at the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative brings together industry expertise and government information to facilitate better execution and implementation of cyber defense plans. Maturing the JCDC will help identify and mitigate the risk faced by a growing number of sectors critical to the basic functioning of our country and safety of our citizens. Thank you again for coming before us today, and I look forward to our conversation. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Director Easterly, we will submit the full text of your official statement for the hearing record. Please begin your oral summary, which I ask that you keep to 5 minutes.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Roybal-Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, members of the subcommittee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify regarding our FY23 President's Budget for Cisa. I'm really thrilled to be here as your partner in helping to safeguard and secure cyberspace and our nation's critical infrastructure. And I want to start by just thanking you all for your steadfast support in ensuring that CISA has the resources necessary to carry out this critical mission on behalf of the nation. I'm truly honored to come before you to discuss our budget, because the budget that you've received really recognizes the criticality of our mission and provides the resources that we need to be able to achieve it. Since being sworn in as director about 9 months ago in July, I continue to be impressed with the talent, the creativity, the enthusiasm of my workforce, and as I share with them every day, this really is the best job in government. As the nation's cyber defense agency, CISA serves as both the operational lead for federal cybersecurity and as the national coordinator for critical infrastructure security and resilience. And we continue to work very closely with our partners across government, in the private sector, and with local communities to protect our country's networks and the critical infrastructure from malicious cyber activity, and also to share timely and actionable information that will be relevant to help protect our networks. The $2.5 billion requested for CISA by the administration represents a marked increase, nearly 18% more than last year's request, and it really recognizes our growing role in the security and resilience of our nation, the confidence in our ability to execute, and the intent to ensure that we have the tools necessary to keep our communities safe and secure. To effectively execute our role as the operational lead for federal civilian cybersecurity, the protection of the .gov, we have to advance our ability to actively detect threats targeting federal networks and gain granular visibility into the cybersecurity of federal infrastructure. The budget provides federal cybersecurity funding and increase a total of $1.5 billion for CISA cybersecurity programs and activities that enable CISA and our federal partners to detect, analyze, mitigate, and respond to cybersecurity threats. Within this amount, the budget includes $71 million for the JCDC, as the ranking member just mentioned, to ensure that we can continue cyber operational planning and partner engagement that are so critical to our nation's collective cyber defense. The budget also includes $407 million for NCPS, $425 million for continuous mitigation and diagnostics, very important for that federal cybersecurity, to provide that technological foundation to really secure and defend federal civilian executive branch networks. Importantly, $174 million to annualize what we got with the American Rescue Plan Act, incredibly important to continue again in protecting the .gov. The budget also makes critical investments in mission enabling. As we grow as an agency and being the newest federal agency in the U.S. government, we have to grow commensurately in the engine that drives mission. So procurement, facilities, human capital, our budgeting. It's incredibly important to the success of everything we're trying to do, to include the execution of our budget. To support our operational capabilities, we've also asked for $175 million in infrastructure protection, $187 million for our growing field force that I'm incredibly excited about, working on the front lines with many of your constituents, $170 million for our emergency communications mission. It also fully funds our risk management activities, to include $115 million for our National Risk Management Center that deals with things like securing our supply chains, incredibly important. Finally, at the heart of our mission is partnership and collaboration, and that's why $72 million for our stakeholder engagement activities, fostering collaboration and coordination, and that culture of shared responsibility that is so important and foundational to our collective defense of the nation. As you all know, our nation faces unprecedented risk. As you said, Chairwoman, we are at a specific moment in time, and CISA is at the center of our national call to action in collaboration with our government partners, critical infrastructure entities, our international allies, and with the support of the Congress. We will continue to make progress in addressing this risk and maintaining the availability of critical services to the American people. In closing, I just want to take a moment again to recognize this committee's strong support for CISA, your consistent efforts to fully resource and in many cases enhance our operational capabilities in response to complex and evolving threats has made our nation safer. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Director Easterly, last week, CISA, along with the FBI and NSA and international partners, issued a joint cybersecurity advisory on Russian state-sponsored threats to critical infrastructure within and beyond Ukraine. This advisory comes on the heels of a call I understand that you had with over 13,000 industry stakeholders to provide an update on the potential for Russian cyber attacks against the United States. The timing of these actions, of course, is critical. And last month, President Biden issued a statement warning about the potential for Russia to carry out malicious cyber attacks. And in a recent interview, you emphasized the need for immediate action, saying, "We have to assume there's going to be a breach, there's going to be an incident, there's going to be an attack." For the benefit of the committee and the American public, what can you tell us about what an attack might look like and what you see as the immediacy of this threat?
Thank you for that very important question, Chairwoman. As we know, malicious cyber activity is part of the Russian playbook. And as we heard from the President, we know of evolving intelligence that the Russians are planning for potential attacks on our nation. And so we have actually, for the past 5+ months, been working with our partners across the federal government, across private industry, and with our state and local partners to enable us to share threat information at the classified and unclassified level with our intelligence community partners, and all of the mitigation guidance that partners need to follow to ensure that they can drive down risk to their networks. And that is really what's behind the advisory you mentioned and our Shields Up campaign, which is very focused on making sure that businesses, large and small, critical infrastructure owners and operators, and the American people understand the threat and understand all the steps that they need to take to ensure the security and resilience of their networks. So in terms of the threat, I think we could see three things. I think we could see the threat that we see going on pretty aggressively, Russian cyber attacks against Ukraine. They could cascade out of the region and have an impact on the U.S. We saw that in NotPetya in 2017, a destructive malware that cascaded out of Ukraine, affected multinationals. We could see Russian-aligned cyber criminals launch ransomware attacks, as we saw last summer in Colonial Pipeline and JBS Foods, or we could see a deliberate attack by Russian state-sponsored actors against our critical infrastructure. And that's why we've been working to ensure that everybody has their shields up and working collaboratively with our Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, specifically with the technology companies, with the financial companies, with the energy companies, to ensure they have all the guidance they need to protect themselves.
What steps is Cisa actually taking to increase the security and resilience of the nation's networks and critical infrastructure in response to the threats that you've just highlighted?
As you know, ma'am, we don't own that infrastructure. And so the vast majority is in private hands. And so we have been working since I came into this job to try and build those trusted partnerships with the private sector. I just spent the last 4.5 years at Morgan Stanley and making sure that those are trusted and collaborative partnerships. That has really been our focus, knowing that we don't own that infrastructure. So we have been using the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. The Congress gave us the authorities to set up a planning office. We did that in August. And with respect to Ukraine, we actually work with some of the biggest technology companies in the country to develop a plan. It's the first time the federal cyber ecosystem, the federal government, has worked with the private sector to develop a multi-phased plan about what we would do if there was a cyber attack. And then we stood up a collaboration channel using a platform called Slack, where we are sharing real-time information about what the private sector is seeing and what the government is seeing, so we can put that picture together in a common operating environment. You recall that SolarWinds was not discovered by the U.S. government. It was discovered by a cybersecurity vendor. So our partnership with those technology companies is critical. In addition, we've been pulling the financial services sector, 22 of the biggest banks, 38 of the biggest energy companies, into similar collaboration channels so we can share information and early warning on malicious activities so that we can be prepared to drive down risk to the nation.
Okay. Are the resources and tools provided to organizations, especially critical infrastructure operators, through CISA's Shield Up campaign and other CISA efforts sufficient to defend our critical infrastructure against this threat? And if not, what additional support does CISA need?
I think what we asked for in our budget for this year is sufficient for our mission. However, I think as we grow as America's Cyber Defense Agency, as we see a very complex threat environment that continues to get more complex and threat actors that continue to get more sophisticated and are very well resourced, we look forward to working with this committee to make sure that we do have the capacity and the capability to be able to defend federal networks and to work with our critical infrastructure partners, some of which that are very target-rich but resource-poor. Think of the small hospitals, the small schools, the water utilities. We need to be able to continually provide them no-cost services, tools, and assessments to ensure that they can raise that cybersecurity baseline. That's why the grant programs are so important. But we're very excited to work with you to make sure we can grow our capability to provide the defense that the nation needs in cyber.
Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And again, Director Easterly, I want to thank you for being with us today and wish you every sincere success with this mission. This is so critically important. We do a lot with the federal government, but this agency's mission, your mission, is so important. If I may, Director Easterly, the fiscal year 2023 budget requests nearly $2.5 billion in funding for Cisa. This represents an increase of over $300 million above fiscal 22, above the fiscal 22 President's budget request. That's over a 10% increase. As I noted in my opening remarks, this is in addition to the nearly $1 billion provided in fiscal 2022 through the Omnibus, the American Rescue Plan, and the Infrastructure Bill. Madam Director, Congress has given Cisa a substantial amount of funding in a short period of time. Can you please outline some of the key cybersecurity capabilities those funds will provide and how it mitigates the threat of a cyber attack? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And again, very grateful for the funding we've received to date and excited to be able to execute our budget if we get what we requested. As you mentioned, $377 million more dollars that were requested in FY22. And in terms of the priorities and how we plan to put that into execution, I think of it in three major buckets: people, process, and partnership. On the people side, and I'd love to talk more about what you mentioned in your opening statement, Ranking Member, on how we're going to recruit and retain our talent, because that is incredibly important. But we're also using that to support the rest of the agency. So we need to be able to have money for building human capital and procurement and acquisition and funding our financial office and our facilities. So that engine that drives the ability to create mission is incredibly important. The $174 million that we asked for that will be able to annualize the American Rescue Plan Act to help on federal cybersecurity, to include capabilities like endpoint detection and response, more money for our Cyber Defense Collaborative. So that's really about partnerships with the federal cyber executive branch departments and agencies, those 101 separate departments and agencies, and with the private sector and with our international partners. So that is incredibly important. And then the rest of the funding that we have focused on things like our continuous diagnostic and mitigation capabilities to really allow us to have that very important visibility into federal civilian executive branch network that is absolutely critical to be able to manage the enterprise as an enterprise, not 101 separate tribal agencies. And that's something that's about modernization and transformation. And to be frank, it's not turnkey. It is a journey that we're taking that we need to instantiate these capabilities to finally be able to truly defend the federal civilian executive branch, sir.
Thank you so much for your answer. As my time is waning, I will be very brief. As you think about the growth of your agency, if we fully fund the President's request with some adjustments for what we provided in fiscal 22, will Cisa be right-sized for the job? Or put another way, does Cisa need time to mature as an organization before continuing to grow at this pace?
I frankly think the threat environment demands that we continue to increase our capability and our capacity. But that, of course, demands that I am able to keep full confidence of this committee that I can execute those funds. Incredibly important that as we get more money, that we are able to responsibly execute it. So we, with the additional funds we got last year, we executed it 99+%, which I'm very proud of the team and can't take a lot of credit for that since I got here to the end of last fiscal year. But that's why creating those mission enablers are so important to support the maturity and the evolution. You know, the threat environment isn't getting any less dynamic, less complex, less dangerous, and the threat actors are not getting any less sophisticated, sir. So I believe for us to achieve the Congress's vision to be America's cyber defense agency, that we are likely going to continue to need to grow in capacity and capability. But I'd love to come back and have that conversation when the timing is right.
Thank you, Director Easterly. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Votes have been called, so I'm going to go to Mr. Rupesberger, and then Mr. Rutherford, you will be next, first when we get back.
Well, Director, I've been going over your resume, and I usually don't do this, but I think it's important that we discuss some of your experience. I believe very strongly in the area of defense and also what we're talking about today, cybersecurity. The government and the business sector must work together in a partnership. The business sector can have a lot more sophistication and money to do certain things. Working together, our Russia's and China's, they're communist, and we have an advantage that we can have a better product at the end. I think you're seeing what's going on just in the Ukraine right now. But I just want to point out, you know, you have a great career. You have a balanced career. You talked about Morgan Stanley, being in the business sector and dealing in this field too, which is important. I think when you look at your education, you worked at, well, first thing you went to West Point, and then after that you were a Rhodes Scholar. You attended Oxford. You know, it seems that you have a tremendous amount of experience to do the job. And you also know that you're only as good as your team, and I'm sure you have the ability to be a good team. I also like the fact that you were involved in an issue we keep debating over and over about the NSA and versus Cyber Command. And, you know, right now I think we've made the right decision, but we have to keep moving ahead. But when you talk to General Nakasone, his recommendation is to stay there now. So it's something I'm going to be talking to you about also. My question, the FY22 omnibus provided Cisa with $65 million for federal network. It's called Attack Surface Management and National Vulnerability Incident Response. Now, does Cisa have plans to effectively execute these funds to provide a real-time common operating picture into .gov assets that touch the public-facing internet? And also, this is a similar capability which was U.S. Cyber Command's top unfunded priority last year. Are best practices from other parts of the government, such as Department of Defense, being studied? You know, we have to work as a team. We know that this is probably one of the most important issues we're going to have to deal with in our lifetime. And I'm glad you're in that position, and we're going to try to do whatever we can, this committee, stand behind you, because you've got a lot of growing to do. You've got good people, but there's still a lot of growing. And I know that you had a role at NSA at one time, and then working on some of these issues. And you know, I think we're ready to go as long as we can keep funding you and help you, just as long as you can justify the request.
Yes, sir.
So.
Thank you so much, sir. On the request for the attack surface management capabilities, I am very excited about that. Having spent 2+ decades in the Army and tactical operations centers all over the world and 3 times in a combat zone, I really understand the importance of a common operating picture. And frankly, it's one of the things that we don't have yet. And it goes to the point I made earlier about the importance of increased visibility. And that's why coming together across the federal cyber ecosystem and why the JCDC with NSA, FBI, Cisa, coming together with the private sector to help create that common operating picture is so absolutely critical. Cybercom is also part of the JCDC. And as you mentioned, sir, I spent a good bit of time at NSA and actually worked with Paul Nakasone and Chris Inglis to help stand up U.S. Cyber Command. So my connections to Fort Meade are pretty strong, and we absolutely are in regular contact with them to learn those lessons about how they've gone through this process. And I think it's also important to say that their common operating picture can't be different from our common operating picture. They need to be connected because global networks are connected. And so those partnerships, as you pointed out, sir, really that cybersecurity, cyber is a team sport, is absolutely critical to the success. As Chris Inglis likes to say, you have to beat one of us to beat all of us.
And you know, you mentioned those gentlemen. You have, really, in my opinion, one of the better teams in place. Not that the people before were doing the job, and with you aboard there, working with them and developing relationships. I think if we can continue to fund you, justified funding, I think we've got a good future ahead for our cybersecurity.
Thank you, sir.
Director, sir, we're now going to go into recess, and we'll be back as quickly as we can.
Wonderful. Thank you, ma'am.
The subcommittee will now come to order. Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, and I thank Director Easterly for being here today. You know, I have to kind of echo my colleague, Mr. Rupensberger. I really am impressed with your past, and I think we're going to be impressed with your future. And so I thank you for all that you're doing for our country. This is, you know, I think just recent history has shown us how really important this department is going to be. And that, you know, between SolarWinds, Colonial, JBS, those attacks showed that it's not just government, it's private industry, it's everywhere. And you all are going to play a major part in that prevention, detection, and mitigation. So my first question, kind of going back and looking at those agencies that were impacted by SolarWinds particularly, can you tell me the damage that was done, how the mitigation on that is going, and then kind of a second piece to that, what's being done to detect and minimize you know, zero-day vulnerabilities that may be out there in all three sectors?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words and appreciate it. SolarWinds, as you know, sir, was really a wake-up call. And it was a wake-up call that taught us a couple key things. One, it taught us that we do not have the requisite visibility into the federal civilian executive branch networks to be able to effectively protect and defend them. So all of the improvements that we've looked to make over the past 9 months to increase that visibility, to improve our architecture, to modernize, to be able to put in place zero trust, to really build more than just a network perimeter security mechanism is so important to really getting after that visibility issue. And we've spent a lot of time doing that, and some of our budget request speaks to those types of capabilities.
Right.
So I think that's incredibly important. I think the second thing that we have learned is we have to be able to work closely with our private sector partners more closely, because as you saw with SolarWinds, sir, that was not detected either within the federal civilian executive branch in the government or within the intelligence community. It was detected by a private sector company called FireEye.
Right.
And so the partnerships that we are forging with the private sector, who oftentimes are going to detect that malicious activity before we do, are so absolutely critical in forging that collective defense. And so as we build more detective capabilities, as we continue to mature our continuous diagnostics and mitigation program, as we instantiate zero trust and secure cloud and multi-factor authentication and endpoint detection and response, making sure that we're also bringing together the private sector and the public sector to really build that common picture of the threat environment, I think is going to be critical to solving this really challenging and complex problem.
And listen, I want to congratulate you on those efforts of outreach. I know in my district, I think within the next month or so, we have scheduled a Cisa individual is coming down to talk to our small business Hispanic owners who, you know, we want to help them prepare. And then I think we're going to have a follow-up with the chambers. So your folks are doing a great job on, you know, responding to those outreach efforts, and I really appreciate that. Beyond the grants that you mentioned before, and these sort of one-on-one working together with local businesses, can you give me any other ideas about how we may help the small business community prepare for these types of attacks?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. And I know my team down in the 4th District has had a lot of fun working with your constituents and really enjoy. I think that's the greatest thing that we've been building over the past couple of years is the the field force that allows us to engage on the front lines where the action really happens. So,
Right.
so really grateful.
It's been excellent.
Really grateful. In addition to the grant programs, which I think are really important for state and local, we offer a whole slew of no-cost services, whether that's tools, assessments, phishing assessments, vulnerability assessments, resilience assessments, no-cost free training that we do with our cybersecurity advisors and our protective security advisors. And we provide that really all over the country. One of the things that I'm proud of that our team did as part of our Shields Up effort is we work with private sector, and so you can go on that website and look at pages and pages of free cybersecurity services and tools. Because probably like you, sir, I worry a lot about those target-rich but resource-poor entities, small businesses that Americans rely on for commerce and everything else, and really making sure that they have the knowledge and the capabilities to increase their cybersecurity baseline is so important.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry my time has run out, but thank you again for everything. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Ms. Underwood?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Easterly, for being with us today. Business leaders play an essential role in our national security. In March, I participated in a briefing for Illinois small businesses with the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, Cisa, and FBI to help Illinois businesses prevent, identify, and respond to malicious cyber activity. The briefing informed business leaders about CISA's Shield Up guidance and all the services and tools CISA can offer to companies like theirs. One tool CISA mentioned during this briefing is its phishing email exercise, where it will send a 6-week campaign of emails to a company's employees and evaluate areas for improvement. The most consistent comment that we received during and after the briefing was that our constituents and businesses did not know about CISA's wide range of resources. Do regional CISA offices have the capacity to provide more workshops and briefings like these to help small and medium-sized companies learn about their resources? And how else can CISA reach out to share tools and resources with the public?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. Thank you so much for it. This is why I'm so excited about the growth of our field force, because I think it's incredibly important that we are able to raise awareness. And it's something that I would ask for your help and the rest of the help from the committee, because, as we know, we are the newest agency in the federal government. The Congress set us up to be America's cyber defense agency to help support the resilience and security of our critical infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day. And we are there to provide a whole range of no-cost services, advisories, guidance. And so we are working to get out to all the constituencies, your districts, every region, to be able to ensure that that information and that guidance is out there, to include very important things like those phishing assessments, those resilience assessments, those vulnerability assessments. So I would be grateful to continue to work with you all, and I would ask for your help in amplifying who we are and what we do for the American people.
Okay. I think it's especially important that small and medium companies have the tools that they need to remain secure. In 2021, more than 40% of cyber attacks targeted small and medium-sized businesses, preying on companies that often lack the resources and personnel to implement cyber hygiene measures. What else is CISA doing to build strong partnerships between public and private sectors to defend against the evolving threats of today and tomorrow?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Our growth in cybersecurity advisors and cybersecurity state coordinators will in fact help, because we can work directly on the front lines with all of your constituents to make sure that they have the tools and the resources that they need. But the other thing, just going back to my point about what we're building with the private sector, so the dots that we're connecting, given the threats that are being illuminated by our work with the private sector, all of that then turns into advisories and guidance that we publish very widely that can be used by all manner of businesses. So if you go to the Shields Up website, we specifically say, here is guidance for businesses large and small. And I am keenly aware that it is those small businesses that oftentimes are strong targets for malicious cyber actors, but also don't have the resources or the knowledge or the guidance to be able to protect themselves. And so we are on a widespread campaign across the country to ensure that all businesses have what they need, to include the knowledge, guidance, tools, and capabilities to help protect themselves, because that connectivity really is about making the nation safer.
During our briefing, one participant submitted a question and asked, what's the largest risk for local governments? Can you share your thoughts on that and how local governments could best prepare?
Absolutely. I think because of what we just talked about in the fact that many of these small businesses are not well-resourced, don't have the security people, the technology, the assessments, as we've seen over the last year and a half, it's really the scourge of ransomware that has impacted these schools, these municipalities, these small businesses, these hospitals. And so it's why we developed this one-stop shop, stopransomware.gov website that pulled together all of the resources across the federal government to say, this is what we know about ransomware. This is how you protect yourself from being hacked, and this is how, this is what you do when you have been hacked. I think that's incredibly important.
Well, I was proud that the National Defense Authorization in 21 contained a component of the Resilience Act, which was a bill of mind that protects communities from domestic terrorism. The provision required Cisa to develop a stakeholder outreach and operational engagement strategy by January 1st of this year to ensure that critical infrastructure and nonprofit organizations are benefiting from DHS services. And then Cisa was required to submit the plan to the House Committee on Homeland Security. Can you give an update on the development of this outreach strategy and implementation plan?
You bet. Thanks for asking. My very diligent team created the strategy. What I've asked them to do is to make sure that it is nested within the wider CISA strategy, because I want to make sure we are holistically looking across our entire agency, because stakeholders and partnerships are absolutely fundamental to everything we do. And so I am looking to get that full strategy to include the stakeholder engagement strategy in the next several months, and I would love to come brief you on some of the specifics, because I absolutely agree our engagement at all levels, state, local, private industry, and then in particular the nonprofit community. When I was in the private sector, I served on several nonprofit boards, and they're part of, in some ways, because they hold a lot of sensitive data, target rich and resource poor. So helping them make sure that they can raise their cybersecurity baseline is absolutely critical.
Ms. Henson.
Thank you, I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Director Easterly. Thank you for coming before us today. I really appreciated in your opening remarks, you talked about the threats from Russia, China, these countries that, North Korea, that they keep engaging against us in this way. And I'm pleased also about the state and local partnerships that you're working to develop. When we look at critical infrastructure and its impact on the food supply, we're very sensitive to that, obviously, in Iowa. I also heard you mention JBS in your opening remarks, which that directly impacted my district with the plant there. So as we know, cyber attacks really can threaten our nation's food supply, really disrupt our economy. So how are you, as an agency at CISA, engaging with targeted entities, similar entities to that? Is that the field force? Is that how you're trying to to roll that out? And then what are you doing to learn from those past exposures, like what JBS experienced?
Yeah, great question. It was similar to how Colonial Pipeline was a wake-up call for that sector. JBS was really a wake-up call for the food and agriculture sector. And after that occurred, we actually got together with the co-sector risk management agencies, Department of Agriculture and HHS, to actually do that after-action review. What did we learn from that, and what can we do to better secure what is largely, as you know, ma'am, private? There's really, no government aspect of that. And because many of these are part of those target-rich, resource-poor, we have to be able to ensure that they have the tools and the guidance so that they can help protect themselves. So as you mentioned, the field force, 2 of my regions actually partnered in late 2021 and 22 to ensure that we walk through an exercise on what do we need to do to ensure we're protected. And as you probably recall, the new cooperative ransomware attack, that was also something that we looked at. We did an after-action review, and then we put out guidance on what these entities needed to do to protect themselves. So it's one of these places where we know we need additional resources, and that's one of the reasons why our budget requests invest a significant amount in what we are trying to do in our field force to provide these services to these target-rich, resource-poor entities.
Well, I think a lot of people learned a lot of lessons from what happened in those cases. But, you know, when you talk about your funding request, critical infrastructure, specifically enhanced protection there, how do you choose what is the priority there? How do you choose which critical infrastructure to prioritize?
Yeah. You know, something I learned in the Army, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And it's hard because we know in today's complex technology world, everything is connected. So in some ways, you have to be, you have to say, yes, I prioritize, but I also need to know that even if I spend $1 billion at Morgan Stanley in protecting my networks, I might have vendors that are connected to that network within my supply chain.
A liability there too, yeah.
Right. So what we're trying to do through our National Risk Management Center is to actually delineate what we're calling the primary systemically important entities, which lay out those entities, major entities, that are systemically critical to our national security, our economic prosperity, and our public health and safety. And so the list now, which is thousands and thousands based on what's called Section 9 of the Executive Order in 2013, 13636, is just too big. And so what we're trying to do is pare that down, but we want to work through it with our sector risk management agency partners who have that expertise. And I frankly want to work through it with the private sector to make sure that we are all in agreement on this, because at the end of the day, if there is a major attack on this country, we have to make sure that those most systemically critical entities have the resources, the intelligence, the capabilities to be able to defend our nation.
So I heard you ask us for our help in getting word out about these things.
Yes,
What do you think is the way we can, other than funding for the agency, what are the other ways where you think we can be helpful to you in getting that message out? I think about our rural communities, and they need to know this information. A lot of those small, you know, risk averse, they want to be risk averse, but obviously they don't have necessarily the tools to do that. But what would you recommend there?
Well, I would just greatly appreciate, obviously, the budget piece, but continue to help us amplify our message. You know, as America's Cyber Defense Agency, the newest agency in the federal government, a lot of people don't know what Cisa is. Mm-hmm. And so helping us get that message out so folks understand we have a whole variety of no-cost services and tools, which is incredible for some of these small entities that just don't have the resources. And so we have a field force that meets with constituents in every district and every state, and I would be very glad to meet with your constituents and help them understand the kind of services that we can provide to help keep them safe and secure in cyberspace.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Director, you should be careful about offering to visit districts, because there's a lot of us who will take you up.
I'm up for it.
On those types of
I'm in.
Those types of things. Miss Hinson and I might be sending you letters. Director, I wanted to focus on the election security efforts that you highlighted in your written testimony. One issue that I've been tracking closely is misinformation and disinformation and election interference in the Spanish-speaking community. In fact, I just came from the Committee on House Administration, a subcommittee on elections, where we focused on mis and disinformation, disenfranchise, and how it disenfranchises voters. In response to foreign influence in 2020 elections, CISA developed the mis, dis, and malinformation, MDM teams, as you mentioned. Just this year, the team created a variety of useful resources for the public, and I appreciate what you all have done. However, those materials are only available in English. And as we saw in the 2020 elections, Spanish-speaking communities were significantly targeted with election misinformation. It's crucial that any misinformation efforts be given not just in Spanish, but in other languages where we have seen this activity. Could you share your long-term strategy for the MDM teams? How do they plan to release materials? And how do you plan to reach into other communities where non-English speaking residents are of primary focus as well?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. It's so important. You know, we've been building the misinformation, disinformation, malinformation team for about 1.5 years now. We've given additional resources. The focus is really on threats that could impact our critical infrastructure, like our election infrastructure. And as you pointed out, Representative, we actually have created a lot of great products, and I am keenly aware that they need to be translated. And the good news is we are working on that. So hopefully soon you can go to our MDM website and see the translations in Spanish, and we're also going to look at other languages as well. But Very important to me that we make sure that those are available as widely as possible.
Great, I appreciate that. The cyber workforce, I wanted to shift gears a bit. Issues impact national security, as we know, and in the department's budget request, CISA also proposes to zero out funding to support the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. As you know, funds were provided by Congress specifically to support that program. Can you share why CISA proposes to cut funding for this program?
I personally believe, and this budget was created with, I think some of our colleagues thought that perhaps because we are a growing agency, that those capabilities were best put in places like the National Science Foundation. If that money comes to CISA, it is a passion of mine to ensure that we are educating K through 12 and frankly, K through gray. This is all about the American people keeping safe and secure online. So if that money ends up coming to us, I would be very happy to implement it. If that money ends up at the National Science Foundation, I will be thrilled to partner with them to ensure we can put resources in place to educate our kids so they can stay safe online.
Over the last decade, CISA and the NSA have worked closely together to support and develop a cyber workforce pipeline as well. Local university in my district, Cal State San Bernardino, a public university and Hispanic serving institution, has been a key player in building that pipeline. Our country can absolutely benefit from a closer coordination between CISA and NSA Centers for Academic Excellence cybersecurity programs. And currently, CISA's Chief Learning Officer leads the DHS Memorandum of Understanding of Agreement with NSA, but we haven't seen DHS fully fund that partnership. What can CISA do to fully embrace this partnership, specifically with respect to Centers for Academic Excellence, and what's the hesitation within CISA to move forward?
No hesitation. I think it's just a matter of we are a growing agency, we're a maturing agency, and we're looking to put programs in place that will be sustainable and scalable. We are doing some pilots, but I want to make sure something as important as building a diverse workforce and tapping into those schools of excellence, which, having served at the National Security Agency, I absolutely appreciate how you tap into that talent. I want to make sure that this is something we can do on a scalable basis. So we are in the process of completely retooling our talent management ecosystem. How do we recruit people, train, mentor, coach, certify, set up retention opportunities, and how do we tap into these universities all over the country much more effectively? And so that is something that I'm putting a lot of energy into, both trying to kill some of the bureaucracy about how hard it is to hire people into the federal government, but also putting into play some of the new authorities that Congress gave us, the cyber talent management system, so we can hire much more flexibly to include people coming out of these universities through the Scholarship for Service program, but also be able to pay them closer to market so we can stay competitive.
Thank you, Director. Yield back, Madam Chair.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing today. Ms. Easterly, thank you for joining us today. And especially thank you for your service, 20 years in the Army, 3 combat deployments. That means a lot. And thank you for what you're doing in your current capacity. My primary interest lies in cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure, particularly as it relates to Russia. In a recent alert titled Russian State-Sponsored and Criminal Cyber Threats to Critical Infrastructure, CISA warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine could expose organizations to increased malicious cyber activity. Given that evolving intelligence indicates that the Russian government is exploring options for potential cyber attacks on the U.S. and our allies, could you tell me, in this unclassified setting, the number of engagements that your teams are responding to on a daily basis? And are these state actors or non-state actors, or a combination?
Thanks for the question. To date, we have not seen specific attacks on the U.S. What we are concerned about is the fact that Russian malicious cyber activity is part of their playbook. Mm-hmm. And of course, as you just mentioned, we have seen evolving intelligence about potential plans. To date, thankfully, we have not seen attacks manifest here. But we are very concerned that as the war drags on, that there may in fact be retaliatory attacks, given the very severe sanctions that we have imposed on the Kremlin, the US, and our allies. There may be ransomware attacks, or there may be cascading attacks, as we saw with the destructive malware NotPetya in 2017. It's why, sir, we have focused so much on working with our partners, 150 engagements with tens of thousands of Americans, the 13,000 person call we had, the chairwoman mentioned, to ensure people understand that threat, and that's what was behind that advisory, but more importantly, what they need to do to put their shields up.
So if I struck the word Russia and inserted China or North Korea or Iran, would there be any engagements for you to discuss in this unclassified setting?
Not in this setting, sir.
All right, I would like to take this opportunity to also thank Cisa for their partnership with the University of Mississippi Medical Center on the First Responder Emergency Medical Communications Program. This program is helping to prepare first responders in Mississippi to be better equipped for their job, particularly in rural areas. This project has been a success so far and one that I believe should serve as a national model. Additionally, in your testimony, you mentioned reducing risk of attacks on soft targets in crowded places. My alma mater, the University of Southern Mississippi, has been a leader in this field through their National Center for Spectator Sports Safety and Security, NSF4, for many years and continues to do cutting-edge research on this topic. To accelerate any effort that would reduce the risk of attacks on soft targets in crowded places, I want to ask, does Cisa do any university partnerships with programs such as this?
Yeah, absolutely. And both those partnerships that you mentioned, sir, REM, CDP, as well as what we do with NCS4, I think are so important. I actually was mentioning that I was excited to get out there to be able to be on the front lines and spend some time. I think we're doing something at NCS4 coming up in the coming months. But these are incredibly important because, as we know, universities, some of these colleges, in particular, if you look at the past several months, some of the HBCUs were really the victims of some of these scare campaigns and warnings. And so working with these entities to make sure they know how to put in place protections to protect their people and their students is so incredibly important.
As we all know, especially in the cyberspace, it is increasingly difficult to compete with private sector companies, especially the big names when it comes to recruiting, hiring, and retaining talent. And although the government managed to pull you away from Morgan Stanley, can you comment on your ability to hire talented individuals for jobs within Cisa? And although the agency is still relatively new, are you having any difficulties in retaining that talent?
You know, I've been really thrilled that we've had so many awesome people join the team just over the last year. You know, at the end of the day, nobody comes to government to make money, right? Everybody comes because they have a sense of mission and they feel that it is a calling to raise their hand and support the Constitution of the United States and defend the nation. And I think there are a lot of people that are attracted to this new mission of defending the nation in cyberspace. And you know, I'm not looking for somebody to necessarily make a career. What I'm looking for is somebody to come in, join us maybe for 2 or 3 years, and then maybe they go out and they work at a university. Maybe they go out and they work in a grain cooperative. Maybe they go work in a hospital. But they're still helping with the collective cyber defense of the nation. So I don't like to think of it as competitive. I like to think of it as we're all part of that collective cyber defense. And I love the idea of bringing people in, getting them trained, getting them excited about our mission, making them understand what CISA does, and then maybe sending them back out, again, to be part of the collective cyber defense of the nation.
Thank you for sharing. I yield back.
We're expecting another round of votes around 3:30, 3:45, but I would like to try and squeeze in a second round. And so to give everybody an opportunity, I just want everybody to be cognizant of the 5-minute rule. Okay. Director Esterly, I'm sure you receive a lot of pressure to do more for critical infrastructure operators, especially as our adversaries increasingly seek to target those sectors and the gaps in our current capabilities become more apparent. The President's budget request for 2023 includes $80 million in FEMA's budget for a CISA-led competitive cyber grant program for private and public sector critical infrastructure providers. What is your vision for this grant program? And do you see this as an enduring effort or something more short-term?
Yeah, great question. So as you know, we have that $1 billion grant program for state and local, and we are looking to release the notice of funding opportunity for that for the first $200 million. So I see this $80 million program effectively as a complement to that, to go after those target-rich, resource-poor, critical infrastructure providers. You know, I would draw your attention in particular to water. Water entities that frankly are very target-rich, as we saw with Oldsmar in February of 2021, but resource poor. And so being able to provide grant money to help them raise their cybersecurity baseline, I think is really important. You know, from an enduring capability, I don't know the answer to that, Chairwoman. I want to make sure that we are developing this program with our FEMA colleagues, making sure that we are responsibly putting this in place so that it will make a difference. And then we'll come back to you and let you know whether, in fact, we think it is right-sized and directed at the right things.
And what is the right role for the federal government? And what should critical infrastructure owners and operators realistically be doing on their own?
Yeah, I think some of the big entities have the capabilities, the investment. Certainly when I was at Morgan Stanley, we had a lot of resources to be able to protect the firm. Then there are other entities that are not as well resourced. And so it really is not a one-size-fits-all. And so in the cases of the less well-resourced, that's where we can step in, provide grant funding. We can work with, at the state and local level, the MS-ISAC. We can work directly with our regional field force. But there are some things that I think it's important that we're able to help provide. But at the end of the day, what I want to do is less give a fish than teach a person to fish, so that folks understand the investments that they need to make and the folks they need to hire and the technology they need to implement, and so they can then do it sustainably and scalably going forward without necessarily having to depend on the federal government for support.
The Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or MS-ISAC, has been a great source for state and local entities seeking to increase their cyber security posture. When you think of how the federal government, particularly Cisa and FEMA, can provide cybersecurity support to state and local entities, what do you believe is the right model, and should we continue to build upon the MS-ISAC and the technical support Cisa already provides?
Yeah, the MS-ISAC is a terrific partner. We, of course, fund them. And the services they provide at the state and local level, both information sharing, what's called Albert sensors, which help provide perimeter support, I think are incredibly important, and I'm excited about the continued partnership there. I also think that we need to make sure that the state and local folks can benefit effectively from this new grant program so they can help build their own capabilities. And then finally, I'm excited about being able to use our field force to ensure that at the state and local level, they understand all of the no-cost services that we can provide to them directly. So MS-ISAC, grant programs, field force of Cisa no-cost services, I think is really a three-pronged program to help us support our state and local colleagues.
You know, I'm going to set the example. I have a few seconds left, but I do want to give others opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to talk a little bit about the future. When, you know, CISA is relatively new, obviously, 2018, and in watching this mature makes me want to ask the question about the near-term future, say 5 years, particularly in light of what Mr. Palazzo was talking about earlier, this whole staffing and education piece. As a country, are we preparing for, you know, that generation of workers? Because you don't just, I'm sure you don't just go out on the street and you know, hire folks. They have very specific backgrounds that are necessary. And I'm wondering about our workforce and how that fits into your 5-year plan, 3-year plan, whatever it might be.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Certainly from a Cisa workforce, that's where I am putting a huge amount of effort into making sure that we have the capability and capacity, and frankly, the very diverse workforce that will help us bring that diversity of experience to solving the toughest problems. One of the goals I've set for myself is helping our nation get to 50% women in cybersecurity by the year 2030. So I'm excited about that. But as you point out, sir, this really is a national issue. And that's why going back to the question around K through 12, I do think it's incredibly important. You know, everybody in this room is basically a digital immigrant. Our kids are digital natives. They're on their laptops and iPads from the age of 2. And so ensuring that not only are they facile in terms of how to manipulate things on those iPads, but that they know how to protect themselves is so incredibly important. And as we're helping to make sure they protect themselves, I think we're also igniting that spark about how cool it is to be in cybersecurity. And I think that's how we're going to get after some of these workforce issues. But we really need to create this fluency across all of the country. And it's why I spend so much time on cyber hygiene, really the basics of how to protect ourselves, from the phishing training that Representative Underwood was talking about, to updating your software, to complex differentiated passwords and a password keeper, to using multi-factor authentication. I think the ranking member mentioned this. You know, when I say multi-factor authentication, when I'm talking to the average person, they'll say their eyes will glaze over and it'll sound too technical, and it's multisyllabic. So what does it all mean? And so what we're trying to do, and I'd love this committee's help with it, is to make it real simple, right? More than a password, because that's what it is. Instead of just a login and password, use a second form of authentication. So the more than a password, it also calls for the 1986 classic by Boston, More Than a Feeling. So if you kind of get that in your head, right? So we really are trying to make sure that we can get this message out to the American people in a way that can protect themselves, because MFA studies show keep you 99% from being hacked. And what gets you 99% these days?
That's huge, yeah. Thank you. So let me ask you something from more of a macro level. You know, in the field of criminal law, individuals have a right to protect themselves. And that right is there because we recognize that the government can't be everywhere to protect you. So you have a right to protect yourself. How do you see that conflating over to the cyber world where I'm being attacked and I want to defend myself? Because what I hear a lot about is defense. I'm wondering about offense. How can I, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. But then also, how do I, as an individual, do I have the legal right? And I know some of these questions are being debated now. What is the right of someone to defend themselves, and how do they do that in an offensive way? In other words, punching back, for example.
Yeah. So the great thing about being at Cisa is our North Star is all about cyber defense. So everything we do is about creating resilience, making sure that we can detect, respond, and recover. And so unlike my days in uniform and at U.S. Cyber Command, I do not do offense. But of course, we work very closely with U.S. Cyber Command, with FBI, with the intelligence community, because what those agencies may be doing on the offensive side has to inform what we're doing on the defensive side. And it really goes back to my point about cyber has to be a team sport, but we all have roles and responsibilities that when we come together, we can actually make the nation safer.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. I'd like to discuss election security. You may know that this issue hits close to home for Illinois voters because in July of 2016, Russian hackers penetrated the state of Illinois Board of Elections voter registration database, stealing the personal data of about 76,000 Illinois voters. So ensuring the security and integrity of our elections has always been a top priority. I'd like to get an update on what Cisa is doing to work with state and local election officials to defend our election infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. This is obviously one of our top priorities. Since 2020, my predecessor, Chris Krebs, obviously we're very focused on the 2022 midterms and beyond. One of the things that I am most excited about is we just recently, to the question about talent, we just recently brought on board the former Secretary of State of Washington State, actually Republican, Kim Wyman, incredible election official with decades of experience. And she is my senior election lead. She was actually just out in Arizona. She's out in California now, working hand in hand with our former colleagues, the secretaries of state across the nation, and with state and local election directors to make sure that they can avail themselves of all the resources that are needed to ensure that state and local, because of course, we're the federal government, so we don't get involved in state and local elections, but we are here to help and make sure that all state and local election directors have the resources that they need to ensure the integrity of their election security. And it's both cybersecurity, it's physical security, it's insider security, and it's security from misinformation and disinformation. So we are working very, very hard, hand in hand with our partners to make sure they have what they need.
Great. In your testimony, you stated that Cisa will remain transparent and agile in its vigorous efforts to secure America's election infrastructure from new and evolving threats. What are the major threats specific to the 2022 midterm election, and can you describe some of the new and evolving threats you mentioned in your testimony?
Yeah, thanks for that. So of course, we need to continue to worry about technology threats and cyber threats. And I think the improvements that we've made working with state and local election officials over the past 4 years, 5 years, have actually made a material difference in raising that cybersecurity baseline. And I can't take a lot of credit for it. A lot of credit goes to my predecessor. But I think that work that was done was incredibly important. Now I am also concerned about physical threats, both to election officials as well as facilities. I'm concerned about potential insider threats. And again, I'm concerned about some of the misinformation and disinformation. So as you may know, we set up something called Rumor Control, which is really just a website that enables us to put out information that is really just about facts about absentee ballots, facts about paper ballots, just so the American people have the information that they need to maintain confidence in the elections, in the integrity of elections. Really nothing more important, frankly, for the democracy we live in, for Americans to have that sense of confidence.
Have you found that your staff have been able to connect with state officials across the country on these issues to share the information about these threats, or has the openness from different states changed given the current climate?
You know, to date, I have not sensed a material difference in that. It was one of the reasons why I was very interested in having a former Republican Secretary of State join me, because at the end of the day, you know, I'm an independent. I've been an independent my entire career. I've served in Republican administrations. I've served in Democratic administrations. And the one thing that CISA needs to be able to do is to remain nonpartisan, because we work with Republican secretaries of state, we work with Democratic secretaries of state, and we are all about ensuring that no matter what party you are, you have the tools, the resources, the capabilities to protect your elections. And so I continue to have very good relationships. The Republican Secretary of State, the NAS President, Kyle Ardoin from Louisiana. I mean, all of my experiences to date have been incredibly positive.
I'm glad to hear it. Thanks so much for your testimony today.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for sticking around for round two. I appreciate in your remarks you put in there about emergency communications and emergency resilience. And our district in Iowa is very sensitive to that. In 2020, we had a major derecho come through. 140-mile-an-hour winds. It knocked out communication across the board. Our emergency responders were really struggling to communicate with not only each other, but with members of the community as well. So I'd just like to ask, in what ways are you supporting the mission of making sure that that emergency response critical infrastructure is not only protected, but resilient should a major disaster like that happen? What are the plans in place that you're working with?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, these are kind of the unsung heroes of Cisa. I actually didn't know much about the emergency communications mission before I started going through my confirmation hearing. And it's pretty incredible when you think about that. You call 911 and, you know, somebody answers at the end of the day. And as you just pointed out, if there's no answer on the end of that phone call, it can cause amazing, you know, significant impacts on human life. And so I'm incredibly proud. We actually decided to name April Emergency Communications Month so we could celebrate the great work of all of our emergency communicators across the country, working with partners like NICSWIC and FirstNet and everybody to make sure that these communications are resilient. In terms of going forward, one of the most important things that we're doing is making sure that next generation 911 is cyber resilient, because as we move to technology that may in fact be more vulnerable to the cyber threats that we're seeing increase in complexity and dynamism and danger, we need to ensure that we are standing up new capabilities that are just as resilient to our legacy capabilities. And so a lot of focus on that in the coming years.
Awesome. Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Aguilar?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director, I wanted to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Rutherford's question related to K through 12 focus. The cyber workforce pipeline that we talk about in CISA's Cybersecurity Education and Training Assistance Program, Ctap, has been an important tool in helping to build that pipeline and equip K through 12 teachers with cyber curricula. This program was formally authorized by Congress in 2021 as well, and I was surprised to see that CISA didn't request funding for this program in this fiscal year. My colleagues and I appreciate the creativity that you and your team, bring to this, whether it's funded or whether it's not. But from our perspective, we feel strongly about including, specific categories to kind of sharpen the focus, and especially, given your comments about the workforce and your commitment to have 50% of the workforce by 2030 be women, I think that this is something that we should look at. So can you share the department's long-term strategy for Ctap and the efforts to support cyber education?
Yes, sir. As you alluded to, it's not at all clear whether Ctap funding is going to end up within CISA or within the National Science Foundation. If those funds end up with us, we will do everything we can to be able to leverage them responsibly to really build those pipelines, incredibly important. One of the uses for Ctap funding that you probably know is actually to build the Cyber Innovation Center, which is in Louisiana. I was actually talking to the governor there a couple days ago, and he was saying how important that is, again, in terms of incubating the ability to create these diverse pipelines. So if that funding comes to us, I am very dedicated to making sure that we are looking at the cyber workforce, not just from a CISA perspective, but from a nationwide perspective, when we have to start with our youngest of ages to be able, again, both to keep them safe online, but to ignite that spark because maybe they do want to join the cybersecurity workforce. So I look forward to working with you to make sure we get this right.
So with that, Director Easterly, I want to thank you very much for your time and for the excellent leadership that you're providing to CISA at this very, very challenging time. With that, the Subcommittee on Homeland Security stands adjourned.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.